Oh, this is a good one. What one can be, one must be. Abraham Maslow. Well, hey there. Welcome to the Retirement Answer Man Show. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. And if you're new here, just checking us out, we are dedicated and laser focused on helping you not just survive retirement, but have the confidence to lean in and rock retirement. And that can mean a lot of things, financial and non-financial. And today we're going to continue with segment 3 of our series on how to live a heroic retirement with Michael Balchin from Heroic, a wonderful app on Android and iOS that I use every day and that we licensed, and it comes as a benefit in the Rock Retirement Club. So today we are going to talk about identity. Now, that's a big topic when we deal with someone that is transitioning or already in retirement, because that's a seasonal change of identities, isn't it? Right. We go from a active father or mother, and when the kids go off, that identity changes a little bit. When one retires and puts away their superpower of earning an income, they no longer have the job title, right? I am an attorney. I am a business owner. I am a project manager. I'm a senior VP. All these titles that we've used as our identity, these little capes that we put over ourselves, and those capes come off and we're stripped bare a little bit about what our identity is. It's a little raw, and people can struggle with that, understandably. And so today we're going to talk about from a heroic structure that Michael Balchin and the founder Brian Johnson have put together in their optimized platform and their Heroic app. Is you have 3 domains where you want to lean into your identity, and works in this Abraham Maslow quote of what one can be. Your identity in these 3 domains is going to be the exemplar you in these domains, the you at your very, 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 very best. And we'll always fall short of that, but they're aspirational. And Michael's going to fill all this in during our discussion, but I thought I'd share mine just to give you an idea. Because as we've rolled out the Heroic platform to club members, I've discovered that I'll read somebody else's aspirational identities in these domains, but it's the backstory that really gives you the meat, the color, right? So I thought I'd share mine and then let Michael help us build out this framework. So the 3 domains that we want to have an identity in, whether we're retired or not, one is energy. What is your exemplar, one can be identity in energy? Because energy is the foundation of everything, right? So for me, you were to look on my Heroic app or ask me, my exemplar self that I aspire to is to be a fireball. I consider myself a fireball if I can get to my very, very best. What is a fireball? That it's active, it has movement, it has heat, it can do a lot. And that just resonates with me. I'm like, I want to be a fireball. I want to show in. I want to walk in like a fireball and just emanate that heat and energy out of it. That's my aspiration identity in the first domain, which is energy. Now, the second domain is work. What is your exemplar identity in work? Now, if you're retired, you're like, hey, dude, I'm not working. Work can be your avocations, how you show up with your family, the activities that you do, whether it's pickleball or hobbies, etc. And so for me, my aspirational identity, Roger at his self in this domain, is I am a focused visionary. So when I show up really at my best, I am a focused visionary. And I got the visionary thing down a lot and I have focus down, but a lot of times they're not together and it becomes this manicness of just doing things and not getting as much traction on the important things. So when I show up at my best, I'm a focused visionary, and I reaffirm this every day. And then the last domain is love. How do you show up relationally? And that can be with you and your spouse or your partner, or it could be with your children. It could be with the person at the grocery store. So my aspirational identity in the love domain is I'm a super dude. When I show up as my exemplar self, I am a super dude. I'm kind, I'm encouraging, I listen with full presence. I repair when I screw up. I'm just a super dude. Hey, that Roger, yeah, he's a super dude. That's what I aspire to be. So I thought I'd share those, but we're going to unpack this with Michael and talk about how this works into the framework of virtues and living a heroic retirement. So let's get going with that. Today's show is sponsored by Boomer Benefits. They do Medicare. So when you're facing a Medicare decision or you're planning your Medicare costs, the cool thing is you can hire someone like Boomer Benefits, and that doesn't cost you any money because it's already baked into the Medicare system, whether you use someone like them or not. And this is who we turn to with clients when we're navigating a Medicare decision. So go check them out at boomerbenefits.com/RAM. All right, here we are in week 3 with Michael Balchin from Heroic.us, Heroic and Optimize. And we're going to talk about that in the last episode because this is the 5-week month. So I'm going to explain the Heroic because what Michael's describing is a structure that he and Brian Johnson and, well, countless number of people have worked on really through Millennial that they've brought together in this integrated way. So that'll be fun. Brian, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. I get that sometimes, the Brian Michael thing. So I'm stoked to chat today. I know you've got exciting ideas, but I also wanted to circle back on some things we chatted about in the last episode.
Definitely. Where we want to go.
One of which was Ikigai. So you mentioned Ikigai. We were talking about purpose. And I have a practice, one of my targets in the app, which I know we'll speak to in, I think, the next episode, setting targets, hitting targets. One of my targets in the app is reading a philosopher's note. So I have a practice of reading or listening to a philosopher's note, at least one every single day. If I'm out on like a bike ride on the lakefront, I'll stack it so I can listen to 3 notes in my standard ride that I'm going on. If I'm commuting, I'll listen to a note, etc. So I was listening to a note this morning, an audience of 1, and he mentioned a quote on Ikigai that comes from The Happiness Equation by Neil Pasricha. It's one of the great things about all the wisdom that's in Optimize, that's in Heroic, and all the wisdom that was previously only accessible on the Optimize side of things is now accessible on the Heroic app. So I know everyone has access to that content, but it's all connected.
Well, and also, Michael, just so you know, everybody that's listening is not part of the club where we've licensed the Heroic app. So we'll explain what these philosopher notes are, et cetera.
Perfect.
Either now or
you can get access to the content. Come over, sign up. A lot of it's free, some of it's paid, and we're striving to just deliver astonishing value. But the philosopher's notes, Brian Johnson took kind of 600 plus of the best books in personal development, ancient wisdom, modern science, broke them down in a 6-page PDF, 20-minute MP3s. It's not like a Cliff Note summary of the whole book. Sometimes the note just covers the introduction because the introduction within it has 5 or 10 big ideas that can change your life. So these notes are all 6 pages or 20-minute MP3s with some big ideas from the best books that can change your life. So listen to a note this morning. He mentions Ikigai, and then he quotes Neil Pasricha from The Happiness Equation. And I love the quote, and it helped shift my perspective on Ikigai, what that actually means. Previously, I thought that Ikigai, knowing that it was a reason for waking up in the morning, but thought it was about this kind of big picture purpose that we talked about not needing to have in the last episode. So it's not about having this one huge, my entire life is dedicated to this thing. That is not what an Ikigai is. This reason for waking up in the morning is for each day. So it's not like I've got this thing I'm dedicating my whole life to, and that's why I'm getting up in the morning. It's I've got this current thing that I'm excited about, and that's why I'm excited to get up in the morning. So let me find the actual quote here because it's so good.
While you look for that, I think that rings well with actually a story I told in my book that was shared with me by a friend advisor who had a client who they strived for this person to retire. And then a year into it, John, my friend, went out to visit him and he said, "Hey, Billy, how's it going?" And he basically said, "You know, John," basically said, "it sort of sucks. I wake up and I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, having a beer by 11 a.m. It's not what I thought." He didn't have Ikigai. He had no reason to get up in the morning, which is the danger, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm. And again, it doesn't have to be that huge thing. So here's in the note on Audience of 1, which is Brian quoting Neil Pasricha from The Happiness Equation. Nobody knows what they're going to do with their entire life. Nobody. Having one giant purpose that you strive toward forever isn't the goal. What is? An Ikigai. a current aim, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. So that reason to get out of bed, again, doesn't have to be this huge thing. It's what's the current thing I'm focused on? Maybe it's being a little bit more energized, maybe being a little bit more productive. Maybe it's being a great grandfather. My grandkids are coming today. Or maybe it's creating that report for the organization I'm a part of, or the board work, or the mentorship, whatever it is. Something that's exciting for me today that I can think about. I'm excited to do this. I'm excited to apply my life force to this thing today. And that's the Ikigai. And my previous understanding of Ikigai didn't take in the nuance of that every single day newness to it. So I thought it was it was so funny. I heard it this morning. I was like, oh, I'm going to chat again with Roger. I know we chatted about that in our last episode. I'm going to have to reshare that again. So
I'm really glad you did. Let me see if I can paraphrase this. If you wake up every morning with Ikigai, you won't be an Ikigai. You get that?
I think it's spelled differently, but that's exactly right.
No, that's great. I'm glad you brought that back because that is perfect. It's a daily purpose.
Yeah. And there's one more piece to this that I think it may or may not relate perfectly. But before we hit record, we were chatting about having completed the Ironman. We actually did the same Ironman course. Louisville, shout out to the Louisville Ironman squad. Just so appreciate the amazing people that support those events.
Definitely.
Honestly, more than half the reason that I did it was to get the tattoo. I thought the Ironman tattoos were so cool. I was like, I'm not going to get one unless I actually do the race. Let me do the race. I know everyone has a different reason, but that was genuinely more than half the reason I wanted to do it. So we were talking about the course, and you mentioned it was the first marathon you ever did, which was huge. Like, who does their first marathon after having swam for over an hour and biked for between 5 to 10 hours? Like, that is a lot of activity before you get started.
It is, yeah.
On a 26.2 mile run. But I was thinking about my Ironman just maybe it was yesterday. I've been listening to a lot of Philosopher's Notes on Phil Maffetone's work. And I was thinking about this yesterday, and that we talked about a little bit before the show. I wanted to share a story about my marathon in the Ironman. So I got off the bike. I'm feeling hot. I'm moving hot. My Apple Watch, which I typically use for pacing and heart rate checking, it died on the bike. So I didn't have any device to like measure my speed against. I normally use my breath to measure how fast I'm going. It's a pretty good correlation. But I came off the bike. My legs had been used to moving at a certain cadence. And so I start running and I'm just passing people left and right. And there's people like, oh, good for you, dude. When I later looked at the splits, I'm running like 6:30s, 6:40 minute miles for like the beginning of, which is just crazy fast. Not for like Ironman World Championships, but like for someone in their first Ironman, that's pretty fast. And I ended up doing about slowing the pace down a little bit and not like hitting a wall, but getting to a place where like I just had no more energy. And at that point in the Louisville Ironman marathon course is an out and back loop that you do twice.
Which is a little mean because you actually see the people finishing as you're turning around.
You see the finish line at the halfway point, and you have to turn out and do one more lap. And it was around that point where I just kind of was like, I don't know. I was committed to finishing, but I was no longer at all. I didn't care about how fast it took me to finish. So I started, rather than thinking like, God, I got to do a whole nother half lap and I got to do this whole thing and whatever. I just said, I'm going to get to this next aid station. And the moment I hit the first trash can at the aid station, I'm going to walk. And I'm going to give myself a little walking break. And I'm going to walk from the first trash can of the aid station until the last trash can of the aid station. Then I'm going to run again until the next trash can of the aid station. I broke it down from being this huge thing that felt like so hard to do into just these just let me get here. And when I get there, I'm going to reward myself with a walking break. And I'm going to walk instead of run. And I ran or slowly kind of jogged, hit the aid station, walked, repeat, and just played this game just like next, and I'll get a break, next, get a break, next, get a break. And I share that. And I was thinking about it the other day in the context of, I think my marathon time was something like 3:30 or 3:40, which is a really fast, again, relatively speaking, it is a pretty fast pace. Mm-hmm. And yet I was doing certainly the back half with this willingness to walk, take these breaks in the middle of the course, just hit this next aid station, hit this next aid station, hit this next aid station, then take a break, take a break, take a break. So I say there's a really powerful metaphor for being willing to break big things down into small chunks, right? It's not finish the race, it's just the next aid station. And being willing to allow the body to work and then rest, and then work and then rest, and follow this rhythm of on and off, even these micro pockets on the race. And when we think about our lives, whether that's approaching retirement and entering that retirement part of our life. I think you have a better word for it, like post. So you call it something much, much cooler. But no matter what we're doing, this willingness to be on and then be off and take this huge, big thing of, oh, I got to be successful and finish this race and this time, whatever. And just break it down to what's that next ikigai that I have? What's that next aid station trash can that I'm going to focus on getting to? And when I get there, I'm going to take a little break and then pick the next one and then pick the next one and then pick the next one. If we can string those together and not stop, but keep in motion, even if we're slowing down and resting, then ultimately we can accomplish something like 10 to 12 to 15 to 20 hours of nonstop physical activity.
That's essentially how you accomplish it, though, right? It's baby step by baby step. And you made me think of the quote when you're running out, because I think that's a normal thing in a triathlon, because you're so happy to be off the bike at that point, is if you fly, you die. You go out really in charge, supercharged. It could be with a new workout program or working on your relationship with someone, and you go out all because you're so enthused, but it's not about that initial go. You want to ikigai, just stair step it. Actually, I think I read this in a philosopher note, Michael, just the other day, because I read one a day, and it was about Lone Survivor. Cottrell, I think his name was.
Yep.
And so Lone Survivor is a movie. It was a SEAL, I believe. And he was the last one. His entire team passed and he had like a broken knee, broken back. I mean, this dude couldn't do anything. And he was in the middle of nowhere. And he had like 3 miles he had to get to try to find a village to survive, essentially. And I'm paraphrasing. And he literally, in the note, they talked about he would literally hand draw a line in the ground and crawl to that line. And then hand draw a line and crawl to that line. Same concept of just break. What can you do that you can sustain? That's a great story. Yeah, there's a lot of life lessons in an Ironman or any endurance event for sure.
I'm going to actually pull this up. So I found it on the site because it's such a great story. And it sounds crazy when you share even just like the cliff notes of he had a long way to go. And he literally drew a line in the dirt, dragged his body across that line, win. Draw a line in the dirt, draw your body across that line, win. But 7 miles.
Oh, 7 miles?
Was the distance to this. 7 miles. So it is Marcus Luttrell is his name. Phenomenal story. Trevor Moawad shares it, and it takes what it takes. We've got a philosopher's note on it.
That was the one I read. Yeah, that was one.
But 7 miles, like, dude, I'm not excited to crawl 1/4 of 1 mile. 7 miles is that's a distance.
But he didn't crawl 7 miles, did he? He crawled 2 feet, just a lot at a time.
2 feet at a time. Repeat. Yes, exactly. I love that. Anyway, I know we're stoked to get into identities today. Identities play such a huge part of our app, of behavior change, of showing up as its best version of ourselves. So now is a good time to transition, yeah?
Yeah, let's do it. So
go for it.
Okay. So identity, we talked about what is a hero, virtues. So we would sort of put the virtues first, and identities. You guys define identities, and it's not you guys defining it really. It's looking at all of, like you said, ancient wisdom, philosophy, religious texts of what are the core identities as a person. Because when you're retiring, and you're not at this point, as you said in a prior episode, Michael, neither am I actually, we tend to put our identity as to what we do. I am a dad. I am an attorney. I am a mother. I am a VP of sales. And James Clear points out very, very aptly in Atomic Habits that those are ways that you express your identity. They're not actually who you are. It's healthier to have those be an expression of identity. But from a heroic context, whether someone's leaving work and stripping away those identities or not, what are the 3 core central identities that we should focus on to start with?
Sure. So to set the disclaimer, there's absolutely nothing wrong with identifying as a mother or as a leader or as a CEO. And for someone who's at a stage in their life for which that is something that they want to show up, that's a role they want to play well. That is an amazing identity to own and to show up as like, I am a loving mother. So pausing there, and I know that wasn't the statement of like it's not okay to have those, but I just want to give people exposure, because one of the questions that we have often is, what's the identity? How do I create my identity? What can that be? What are some things that I can put into that? So we talked earlier on about the game that we're playing, right? Eudaimonia via Arete, expressing that best version of ourselves moment to moment to moment, so that we can flourish by putting our virtues into action. You mentioned James Clear. James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about identity literally meaning repeated beingness. So we are what we repeatedly do, right? This repeated beingness, that is our identity. And he makes another great point, and I love that book. For anyone who's not yet read it, highly encourage you to check it out. It's phenomenal. But he says it's almost as if every action, every behavior that we take is casting a vote for the person that we want to be. And the person that we want to be does not have to win unanimously. So they don't need to get 100% of the votes, but they definitely need the majority of the votes. And what I think that means practically is as we go throughout our days and we're either behaving like the best version of ourselves or not, when we fall short, perfect. Don't continue to cast votes in that version of you that you don't want to become. But perfect, course correct, continue casting votes for that version of you that you do want to become. So starting with identity, a lot of people also think that it's actually our feelings that drive our behaviors. So, I'll go to the gym if I feel like doing it, or I'll write that report if I feel like doing it. We like to encourage folks to flip that around. So it's not feelings drive behaviors, but it's our identity drives our behaviors, which drives our feelings. So if we have an identity of, say, a professional athlete or an Olympian or a couch to 5K runner or a fit centenarian, right? And that is the thing that we want to demonstrate in the world. Okay, I am a professional athlete. What does a professional athlete do? Well, they work out. Therefore, if I'm a professional athlete, I'm going to go to the gym. And feelings are the last rung in this model because when you go to the gym, most people leave the gym and they feel great. The hard part is actually getting there. Most people get back from a run, they feel great. You get back from having a great night of sleep, you feel great. You get back from a quality time with people that you care about the most, you feel great. You feel connected. You actually write the report that you've been putting off or put out the podcast or whatever it is. You feel great for having taken that creative action. So feelings don't drive the show, identity drives the show. And then we allow that identity to dictate the behaviors that we're going to take, which then actually create the feelings downstream. So we encourage folks to think about identity in three groups: energy, work, and love. And it's not just identity. We actually encourage folks to think about their life in these three. We call them the big three: energy, work, and love. Origin story comes from Freud and Stephen Covey and Tony Robbins. So Freud, the great psychologist, there's many things that we do not agree about with Freud, but he has this brilliant line of a good human being is work and is love. The essence of being a good human is work and love. We add, well, yes, and unless you're feeling a sense of energy that you can apply to that work and that love, you're going to be falling short. If you have a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, you're going to have a hard time showing up to your work and to your love.
Right. Makes total sense.
So yes, work and love, essence of humanity. And let's make sure that we've got energy there. Energy is that foundation. It's our physiology that drives our psychology. So energy, work, and love as being our big three. To go very, very briefly to Tony Robbins and Stephen Covey, they have what they call roles and goals or categories of improvement. So in personal development, anyone who started setting out goals or done an annual planning kind of thing, they'll see there's so many things I could do there. I want to get better at this and this and this and this and this. And it can easily become overwhelming. I can imagine with a blank slate of in that retiring transition from I've been dedicating most of my waking life to this thing to, well, now I've got to open a blank slate. What do I want to do? This and this and this and this and this. It can become easy to be overwhelmed by all the possibilities.
The paradox of choice. You freeze.
Yes. So we encourage this simplification: energy, work, and love. And we'll break that down to identities, virtues, and behaviors. But starting with just this question of identity, who am I at my best in energy? When I think about the best version of myself, and we can draw from our previous experiences, we can think about the person that we want to become going forward. We can think about the role that we're currently playing. At my best, in my energy, who am I? What's that identity, this alter ego, this name that I can put on that best version of myself?
And so to be clear, because we just went through a workshop with this in the club, working with members of the club of establishing their identities. And it was interesting how difficult it was from first off, the question was, you mean my identity and energy? Let's just take these one at a time. Energy is, you mean what I am right now? And really what you're talking about is that exemplar self of you. When you, in theory, show up fully actualized from an energy standpoint, that's the identity we're shooting for?
It can be. So again, going back to the beginning of maybe their identities are mother or president or leader or whatever it is, identity is a tool for us to think about if I'm showing up as this version of myself today, I'm going to be stepping towards this ultimate best version of myself. So it can be this 30, 40, 50 year fully actualized version, or it can be what's the best version of me today. If I'm showing up like this person today, that's me living in alignment with the best version of myself, not someday, but right now. So the answer to, is it today's identity? Yes. Is it that future state identity? Yes. It's any of those.
But it's an aspirational, I guess is the point, right? Or no, I'm asking.
It doesn't have to be.
Okay.
It does not have to be. And I have found that the most powerful identities for myself are a combination of historical and aspirational. In the context of when I think about when I've shown up at my best in the past, my current work identity is strong safety. I played high school football. I was a strong safety on defense. I was a great strong safety. I was a great run defender. I was a great pass defender. The strong safety is playing kind of a lot of different roles. They're reading the plays and they're reacting. That was me. I was great. And work-wise, when I'm doing my best work-wise, my professional title is heroic chief of staff and head coach. And sometimes that's my identity. But my current work identity is strong safety.
That's your work identity.
That's my work identity. I excelled as a strong safety in the past. And if I were showing up with that energy now, it would help me show up to work power.
So the key with this is that means something to you. It doesn't have to mean anything to anybody else. So
it is only for you. You are the only person that matters.
And from this conversation too, Michael, I'm trying to remember, well, let's stick with energy for the moment. Like my energy identity is fireball. And so for me,
love it.
Is I think of if I show up fully there, I'm going to be like a fireball. I'm going to radiate. I'm going to have motion. Now, fireball sounds all cool. And I think some people got hung up because like a creativity. And one gentleman's work identity was I'm a listener and questioner, which is not fancy, but it means something to him. So I think that's where we can trip ourselves up on these identity aspirations.
Yeah. So in my current energy identity is Iron Man Beast, which shout out to the story early. And did I do an Iron Man? Yes. Do I live like an Iron Man every day? No. If I'm setting that identity, I'm more likely to do the things that someone like that does. So it means something to you. And what it should mean is, if again, the ultimate game we're playing is to express the best version of ourselves more and more consistently, this is a personal little trigger, or almost like it's an arrow point of that compass that's pointing us in the direction of, if I'm being this, am I showing up at my best in energy? If I'm being this, am I showing up at my best in work? If I'm being this, am I showing up at my best in love? And we have these prior versions of ourselves that are still latent within us.
I have a prior version of sloth. I remember that guy.
Well,
but that's not my aspiration.
That's still there too.
Yeah.
Flash, 100-yard dash. Look, to pull those and recognize, and we spoke, I think, in one of the earlier episodes about never getting there, right? We're never going to be exonerated. We're never going to be done from doing this work, but can we do it more consistently? So if you have, when you think back on your life in energy, in work, and in love, you think about a moment of, man, if I could just do that more often, if I could show up like the way I showed up in that thing back then more often, my life would be better, or at least the next couple of weeks, months would be better. And so, perfect. Let me own that identity. Let me commit to trying to show up like Fireball today in my energy.
And it's a trigger just to set the mindset. And energy as an identity is the foundation, because you have to have the energy to do the other things. Right. That makes sense.
And then energy, work, and love. And we can go into examples if you think it would be helpful, but staying maybe just for one moment on the meta level.
Okay.
The research is unequivocal and also like crazy powerful about people assuming a role and what assuming a certain role helps them do. So there's a story about an earthquake in China, and this school collapsed, and there was a boy who was stuck under the rubble and was able to save 2 or 3 of his classmates. And they were interviewing afterwards, and they said, like, how did you find the courage to do that? What made you do that? He said, well, it was my job. I'm a hall monitor. I'm responsible for protecting, the other classmates. And so he was leaning into that role. They brought in kids into a lab and given them an unsolvable puzzle. It's like, you got to find the right key that fits into the lock or something. And some of the kids just do it. And some of the kids they encourage to put on a persona, so they could pick Batman or Dora the Explorer or some other kind of thing. And then they try to solve this puzzle. They want to see which kids gave up first and how do they approach this. And the kids who, and you can find this in the note on The Alter Ego Effect by Todd Herman. But the kids who took on the persona of Dora the Explorer or Batman worked longer at trying to solve this puzzle and also were calmer and cooler and more collected. And one of the kids said something like, Batman never gets ruffled. Batman never gets frustrated. And so like he's being Batman in that moment. So when we can,
I love that.
Take on this identity, man, how would I show up as a fireball to my energy? Or how would I show up as a strong safety dimmer? Or my current love identity, which probably means nothing to anybody except for me, is 0/infinity. And to me, that means two things. Gandhi has a great line of reduce yourself to zero to allow the kind of inevitable to flow through you. If I can get my own ego out of the way, if I can get the things I'm worried about out of the way and reduce my own self to zero, I can be fully present for my family.
Love that.
And an infinity of tapping into an infinite nature of love, an infinite source of love, the divine, whatever it is. And also like infinite patience for all the different pieces. And when I hear that, if I'm transitioning from work, which I'll do in about an hour or so, to my love, and I can take just a moment before that transition, like literally work is done. I'm about to go in the other room. I'm just going to pause. Who am I, my love? 0 and infinity. I'm walking through the door and communicating with my family and engaging with my family in a different way.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Just by the mental switch.
That identity. Yeah, absolutely. The transition moments, I think, are one of the places that it's easy to get wrong. Whether this is a big meta life transition or these moment to moment, I'm going from the gym to the office, to home, to whatever different things are. And if we can remember our energy or work, I love it. Most of the things that we do in our life can fall into energy, work, or love bucket. There are very few things that you can't kind of bucket into one of those. And if we have that, how do I want to show up in this next interaction, this next engagement? Oh, the best version of myself, the name I have given to the best version of myself for this moment, for this day is identity. Boom. I'm going to embody that, show up as that best version of myself. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You are not going to have one identity that is like, this is the thing. It's alive. It should be ever changing, but it should be something that reminds you in this moment, just show up like that version of myself. Show up a little bit better. Show up with like a fireball, whatever it is.
I hadn't really thought as much about the cues of switching contexts, of taking off the work identity and putting on the love identity as a cue to center yourself so you don't bring your work identity too far into a different domain.
And the same thing like entering a work context, right? You sit down at your desk to do your first work of the day. If you are trailing the residue of everything that you've already done versus setting this intentional, all right, work mode, game time, who am I at work? I'm a strong safety. Perfect. I'm showing up this way. There's times when I'll own the world-class heroic chief of staff identity or the head coach identity. If I'm teaching, it's a head coach. And it sets this intention, not just for the whole day, which we've got the AM commitment process, but these transitions of I'm going to approach this next 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour with the intention to show up at my best in this domain that's most important for me to focus on.
And so when we think about I'm glad you brought it back to the meta. Thank you. I wouldn't have done that without you here because I'm not a disciple as deeply as you are of thinking through this and making it your life. And you think about the transition into retirement where you're shedding some of these roles, these actual identities, the VP or whatever, and you have a somewhat of a blank slate to create the rest of your life, either intentionally or not intentionally. And that's why I think this whole framework that we're building throughout this month and in the club are so important to give us a framework. This isn't a job. And I've heard some, this seems like a lot of work. It doesn't have to be a job, but to create some identities because you have the ability. It's like going to a new high school. You get to invent who you are and rethink things and lean into that. So I think that's really a good time to address some of this stuff.
And I know this is probably going longer than your typical podcast. We'll double click into that just for a moment because it's really important. And for anyone who's like wanting, what's my actual identity? Like, how do I decide what it is? On a high level, it really doesn't matter. Pick something that means something to you and then try it on. And if you feel like, oh yeah, that's helped me show up a little bit better, perfect. If not, perfect. Discard it. For someone who's entering this new chapter, they've worn different roles in the past. They've now got this blank slate of who and how do I want to show up now that my previous identities or roles have shifted. I would encourage you to not just, and encourage everybody, but encourage specifically, don't make that a one-time thing.
Yeah.
See how, if you can switch the game to how often can I let the prior version of me die so that the new version of me can be reborn? Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey, brilliant mythologian. If you haven't checked out The Hero's Journey or Finding Joe, is a great documentary about him. Check that out. He's got a line that says, we can't have a resurrection without a crucifixion. We can't be this next version of ourselves without allowing this prior version of ourselves to die. And that could be in as micro moments of, I know you mentioned, don't have big conversations, right? Have lots of little conversations with your partner. Well, when you feel that nudge to, oh, here's a little conversation where maybe I'm holding on to some version of me that wanted to be right or that wanted something. Can I let that version of me die and be reborn as a committed partner, as someone who wants to have this conversation to figure out what's the next thing that I want to accomplish? When my daughter comes in here a little bit earlier than she maybe typically does, and I'm working deep on something, and she makes a bid for my attention, can I, if I've decided that that's what's most important, let that work identity die, let that, I got to do this thing, release that so that I can show up and be present for her. And maybe that micro presence is, hey, sweetie, I need another 15 minutes. I'd love to come play with you in 15 minutes. Can I do that? Perfect. And then I can readjust. Be willing to not just do this transition once or a few times, but over and over and over, faster and faster and faster. And that's part of why we ask people to commit every single day to their identity and allow them to change it every single day, if not multiple times a day. The edit button is your friend. Edit, create a new identity. Something happens that makes you feel more inspired. Boom, show up as that identity, whether you're doing it in the app or not. If you're in some sort of emergency, and this is a kind of an amazing metaphor for it, but like if you can imagine being in a car accident or seeing a car accident or seeing some sort of emergency situation, many of us might automatically put on the identity of rescuer or of calm, collected, and whatever needs done in that moment, it's called out of us and we're embodying that thing. So if we apply that to everything in our life, I just retired, I don't know what I want to do the rest of my life. Perfect. My identity for the next week is going to be curious explorer. What might be out there for me? I don't know, but I'm going to have fun leaning into just exploring that. Or yes, man, right? What the Jim Carrey movie was like, you have to say yes. That's the identity that I'm going to try on and see if it fits. Do I like that? Do I not?
I'm trying to crucify that guy. That guy's got me in a lot of trouble.
Sometimes it's the no man that you gotta try on. But during the purpose episode 2, we spoke about William Damon, the science of purpose, and purpose being something that we learn experientially by getting into experiences, learning what we like, learning what we don't like. I think he calls that the narrative approach to finding our purpose.
Makes sense. Yeah.
It's the same thing with identity, right? We try something on. Does this help me show up? Perfect. Allow that self to die so the new self can be reborn. Allow that skin, that snake's skin to be shed, a la Nietzsche, right? The snake that cannot shed its skin will soon perish. Yeah, allow that skin to shed such that we can show up this next moment as that best version of ourselves and focus on that one day at a time, one moment at a time, enough of a connection to the big picture that we can roughly tell I'm heading in the right direction or not, but being willing to get into action and getting that feedback and then repeat.
So you shared a workbook with me, and we're going to share that workbook in our 6-Shot Saturday email that has a framework that talks about virtues, talks about identities, has some prompts to think of some things. And it's a great framework really a workbook to go along to just playing with us. And I think that's the sense I'm getting, Michael. I don't think you've used the word, but all of this stuff is something just to play with and to lean into and not make it where it has to be deterministic. It's a way of prompting curiosity and prompting roles, etc. That's awesome.
And I love that word. I see this all as play, but the important, a dichotomy of taking it really, 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 really seriously and also playing with it. There might even be, I don't know if the book it might still be up there. I think I took Bruce Lee down, but there's play for a living. So I've got play for a living up there. The master in the art of living makes no distinction between his work and his play. But the essence here, identity, repeated beingness. So who are you when you're at your best? Not this, who am I when I'm perfectly actualized, because we're never going to get there, but who can I be in this moment to show up a little bit more as the best version of myself?
That's the point. Now, next week, to play off this word play, we're going to talk about how do you play the game well and go one step deeper to Ikigai. Did I say it right? How to play this game well, win today. So, Michael, we're going to hit that next week. So now it's time for your questions. I got 2 little housekeeping things here. Number 1 is, If you'd like to ask a question and have it answered on the show, we can't promise everybody because we get a lot of questions, but you can go to rogerwhitney.com/ask Roger. And FYI, if you want a fast pass to get seen a little bit earlier and have better odds of getting on the show as far as your question, leave an audio question because we give a fast pass to audio questions. Why? Because we love to hear your voice, and I think it makes it more dynamic. Number 2 is, if you're not, sign up for our 6-Shot Saturday email, which is a Saturday morning email with 6 quick hits that gives a summary of the show, links to resources that we mention, and helpful things that I'm reading and tips I think might help you on your journey. That's going to do 2 things. One, it's going to give you links to things that we mention. There's a workbook that Michael created around this heroic structure that we will share with you in our 6-Shot Saturday email. We'll put a link to the PDF. But it also gives you a way of having a little bit more of a conversation. You can reply directly to the email, and that comes to me in my inbox. And I try to reply to all of them, and so we can have little micro conversations, which is always sort of fun. But with that said, let's get on to answering some of your questions. So our first question comes from Randy, and they're navigating whether to sell their home for the go-go years of retirement. So I'm going to read Randy's. It's a little bit lengthy, but I think it gives good perspective. Randy says, my wife and I are retired at age 55, 2 years ago. We currently live in a large 4-bedroom suburban home on an acre of land. The property is beautiful with amenities that require a lot of upkeep. We currently pay approximately $10,000 a month in real estate taxes and have averaged about $5,100 a year for lawn and garden, as well as $6,400 a year for home maintenance. Sherlock, what are you barking at? He is such a great guard dog. He'll hear something downstairs, but he'll still stay on the couch but bark. I don't know if that's helpful or not. But anyway, so back to Randy. Randy says, we are tired and the kids have homes of their own in different parts of the country. We have discussed downsizing into a smaller home, but we cannot come up with an area that we want to purchase at this time, and now are considering renting for a year or longer, especially if it allows us the ability to change things up on an annual basis. So the core question, and I'll leave it there for now and maybe fill in a little bit more of what he said, is they have this property that they love, but it takes a lot of upkeep, both financially and physically and logistically, and they're tired. And there's not a lot tying them to this place because their kids live in different places. So I am in favor, Randy, of really considering right-sizing your life to the season of life that you are now in and moving into. I think it's a smart thing to do to recreate your environment. It sounds like this beautiful home served you well to raise a family, but now it's become more of an obstacle to doing the things that you want to do. So I like that idea. Now, what do you do if you don't know where you want to live? Do you sell it and then go find different places? There are a couple different options you can do there, Randy. One is you can keep your house and be very proactive about defining what area you might want to live, whether it's in the country or in the city and where, what state, etc. So you could just keep the house, say, hey, I'm going to pay this for another year, but we're going to take quarterly trips and be very project management about it and explore different areas. And usually when you're exploring those areas, Randy, my suggestion is to start with the big picture, right? Do we want heat or cold? My wife will never move back to Michigan. She doesn't want cold. Okay, well, that cuts out a lot of the states. She doesn't want to be near the beach. That cuts a lot of territory out of our possible places to live. So start to frame it from that macro sense and then slowly go down to, do you want to be in a big city? Do you want to be in the country? Do you want to be in between? How close do you need to be to an airport? Do you want to be in mountains? Start to frame it in that way and then go find places that might fit that profile. I think that's a healthier way of doing it than, oh, let's go check out Chattanooga. I mean, that could be cool. Chattanooga is supposed to be a cool place, but to start to frame in what kind of environment do the two of you want to actually have as your home base? Even if you're going to rent, I would do this exercise. Now, do you sell your house first and rent? That is, you want to have your plan of record that you have now, and then you can create those what if scenarios. So I'm going to go on with Randy's question. They said they project that they would need about $1,700 a month in income from their $450,000 net proceeds from their home in order to pay for the rent. And they're assuming that it's a 60-40. They said in a conservative 60-40 Vanguard portfolio, averaging 4.5% returns, low but conservative. Well, first off, Randy, is it low but conservative? How's that working now? Portfolio returns on average aren't extremely helpful because you don't ever get average. You get great ones, you get bad ones, and they tend to group themselves together. But if you had rent, say $1,700 a month, that's going to be consistent. So I would question that assumption. So his comment was that $1,700 a month from the portfolio earnings, along with $1,800 saved on taxes and home and insurance from a annual basis, would give them a maximum rent of $3,500 amount without affecting their current monthly budget. The investment should maintain its value within the portfolio until we decide to stop renting and purchase a home in our slow go years. Now, again, that question, you say it may maintain its value. We don't know that. So I would be careful with that assumption. Statistically, if it's long enough that you're renting, yes, maybe, but I'd be careful with that. Is the idea of selling a home to rent under the above conditions crazy, or can we use a thought process to better be more financially free to experience new places? I don't think it's crazy, Randy. I think you do want to have a framework around how you're going to do this. The math, does it work or not? I mean, you can rent a really, really nice place for $3,500 depending on where you're living. Some places, I guess you can't. But I would start with where you would rent with the atmospheric ways that we discussed. And then you would go down to, is it going to be a townhome? Is it going to be an apartment? Is it going to be in the city? Is it going to be in suburbia or the country? And then find out what the rents are as you explore this. My suggestion, though, if you were to sell the home, I would put the proceeds as cash. Heck, you can earn over 3% in a T-bill right now for 6 to 9 months. And then redo the entire plan, assuming taking out the expenses of your current home and inputting the rent amount, and then building your pie cake from there. Now, you can ultimately choose to turn on the dividends and things be paid out to you to supplement your income, but I wouldn't make that assumption on the front end. I would go through the process of remapping out your cash flow. And then in the longer term plan, you can play with, well, what if we buy a home later in life? But I don't think it's unreasonable, Randy. I question some of these smaller assumptions. I do think it makes sense, whether you buy a new house or whether you sell and you rent for a while, is to explore where you want to be set up to support the kind of life that you want to live. Like for us, as an example, that is Colorado. Now, our choice was to keep our current home and go rent for a month or so in different places. And we've settled on the Salida area in Colorado. And as this show releases, I am in Salida for 6 weeks. And now we're at the point that we are looking at either building or buying a house because we've done the research and have tested things. And we know this is the environment that supports who we want to be as a person. One little last tidbit is, as you're pursuing this, I think a concurrent project would be to right size your stuff. Because if you've been in this home for a while and it's, larger than you're likely going to go into, you have a lot of stuff that can become a hindrance or a cage. And it's better to get an early start on that than a late start. Because if you figure all this out, you might have to do massive decluttering, which is a big project. Whereas now that you two are thinking forward, you can start to pick the weeds, so to speak, and start to declutter your stuff that served you during a certain season, but likely aren't going to serve you in the next season. Actually, likely will just be excess baggage. That's a project within what we're talking about in this heroic retirement, and we'll get to targets next week. But I have a daily target to declutter one thing in my house or one thing in my life. And that's my way of picking one weed of stuff a day rather than having to go out into the yard and do it all at once. So I think that's a concurrent project. That's a thing you can start now as you two have these discussions. Our next question actually is a comment from Steve on some topic suggestions. I thought I'd throw them out there related to some of the things that we talked about in terms of monthly themes. One is, he said, hey, why don't you do a theme on choosing a financial advisor or not? I know you've touched on this before, and this can present a conflict for Roger. Oh, yeah, it can kind of. Always been a DIY, but he would love to hear what are the different types of advisors that are out there, and what are their compensation structures, and what are their value propositions? What kind of advisors should we have in our life? Financial advisor, tax advisor, estate advisor, insurance broker, etc. That's a great idea, Steve, and I think we can address that in a neutral way, acknowledging biases and self-interest and all that. That's a great idea. Another idea that Steve had was, hey man, there's been a surge of early retirees, he says, a show that specifically speaks to options for early retirees to at least make some money via consulting and part-time. You've done full retirees sharing what they've learned. Maybe we could hear some early retirees, maybe not quite financially independent retired early, but FIRE-ish. That's a great idea too, Steve. I think we tend to sort of talk about things around the transition, that 4 or 5 years around the date of retirement. I do think we could probably flush out, I don't probably think, we can flush out talking to pre-retirees like you mentioned, but also talking to people that have been retired for 5+ years. And that's something we definitely have on the radar. So thanks for the ideas. This is how we develop the show. What is it you're thinking about? So you've helped us with that. Our next question comes from Cheryl. Hey, Roger, I love the show. My parents are in their early 80s. Their assets are all paid off. House. They have $85 in cash and own about 3 company stocks like Coke, McDonald's, worth about $150. My father's pension of $2,700 a month has a pension of $2,700 a month, but they're spending $9,000 a month. I'm worried about they're spending too much, especially with the current stock market. Do you have any advice about moving any of their stocks or anything else? If they live a bit longer, we will have to get a reverse mortgage. I keep telling them they are spending too much. They like shopping and paying for cars and boats they haven't used in years. I appreciate any suggestions. Cheryl, yeah, this is a big situation. They're in their early 80s. So let's just look at the math. Between their cash and their stocks, they have about $235,000. Sounds like there's a gap of $6,300 a month that they are funding from their nest egg. So that can only fund 37 months or about 3 years, which isn't very long. Whether or not they're drawing from Social Security to offset some of that drawdown, you didn't mention Social Security as a benefit. Now, how do you navigate something like this? If somebody has a suggestion and has dealt with this, feel free to email us. Just reply to our 6 Shot Saturday email because I'd love to hear that and try to share it with Cheryl. How do you help protect someone from themselves? And this is your 80-year-old parents who have about 3 years of cash before they're done. Luckily, they have a paid-for house and a pension, and I'm assuming some Social Security, which wasn't mentioned, so perhaps not. That's a hard one, Cheryl. So either one, they're either refusing to acknowledge the situation, maybe for some emotional reasons. Since you've already pointed them out, I would leave open examining for yourself. Are you pointing them out in constructive ways? Parent-child relationships can be very wacky, and obviously we don't know each other, but so I would do some self-examine. Am I delivering the message in a way that it can be heard? That is important. And the fact that they may have some emotional hangups of it. I do know, Cheryl, that many people have a hard time receiving advice from their children or hearing things from people that are familiar to them. I find this with couples a lot, where one spouse will be telling the other spouse something and they probably have said it for years and they're correct, and it might be the delivery in which they're telling it, or it might be they just need to hear it from a third person. And many times when I say something, it's heard, whereas one spouse might have been telling the other spouse for a while. Why that happens, I'm not trained in that, but my thought would be that we tend to get in ruts in how we communicate with people we're most familiar with and tune certain things out. Whereas and they're in their 80s, perhaps somebody that is not their child, that they've changed their diaper, perhaps somebody that has a neutral or more, is positioned more as an independent or an authority, they might hear a little bit more. So that might be something to consider, is having someone outside of you and outside of the family look at it in a neutral way and try to reflect a mirror to see if they see it. Now, it may not overcome this, but I think that might be an option for you. And obviously, the more data to show them black and white rather than And that's the key. It's even the same thing with emotions. When you're feeling emotion, it's sort of this whirlwind, floating, unidentifiable thing. We want to name things very clearly with a sharp line so we can see it and grapple with it. And so some very, very simple math showing this might be helpful as well. That's another idea. And in terms of the emotional issues, it might be some counseling. Might be some underlying things that they may not change. They're 80-something years old, but maybe they can identify and navigate a little bit better with an outside professional. Now, the second cause might be cognitive. Some cognitive impairment that is going on that they're still functional, but their decision-making capacity might be diminished. And that's a little bit more of a structural thing that happens when someone is older. As cognitive capacity decreases, we're more susceptible to sales pitches and to scammers and to click now, because the ease of spending money, the friction to spend money is pretty much gone with TV and Amazon Prime and internet and everything. And so as our cognitive abilities decrease, we're just much more susceptible to that. Heck, I'm 55 and I'm susceptible to that. And I'm still pretty sharp, I think. This is something to consider, where that line is to where, hey, I need to take over here, whether they want me to or not. That is such a fuzzy place, and I'm not a professional to be able to think through this. So those are a couple of things I would think about. One is communicating simply. One, examining how you're delivering the message. Perhaps get a third party to help to deliver that message in a very simple form, because they might respect and hear that more than from a child. Consider the cognitive parts of it and show them things in black and white. One last thought here. I mean, that sounds like they own quote unquote blue chip stocks, but we have to remember we're in a bear market and they have a lot of equities, and God willing, equities will recover and they'll go up, and they'll actually, that 3-year runway that they're currently on might be a 3.5 or 4-year runway, but it can easily go the other direction. And so safety first is probably more appropriate for them right now, because if markets continue to deteriorate, their situation will deteriorate just as quickly, if not more. And we're not even factoring in a health shock or a spending shock of some sort. So this is definitely something to navigate. And I feel for you. And if anybody has a suggestion in dealing with their parents on something that looks like this, please email and we'll try to pass that along via the show. Our next question comes from Santiago in regards to Social Security. Santiago says, born in 1960, lovely spouse, born in 1962. We retired in 2019. Our initial plan, as we followed the wise words of Roger, was to take Social Security at age 70, and we'll be getting the same amount. With crazy inflation now, and maybe during the bridge period for us between now and age 70, should we grab these inflation increases now and take our Social Security at age 62? As our understanding is our benefits are not inflation adjusted until we begin to take them. Or should we split the difference and have one take it now at age 62? We lived the 70s and 80s and remember inflation. Our first mortgage was 9.5%. I think mine was 9.75%. Got you beat. But side note, my current one, I was looking at this the other day, is 2 5/8. This is insane. I never can sell this house. Love the show. Oh, and he said, hey, ads, make sure you consistently give Nicole raises, gift certificates to the spa too. That must be why this question is here, Santiago. You know how to get on the show. Your pal, Santiago. It's a good question, Santiago. Now, remember, when you take your Social Security at age 62, it's going to be decreased from what the actual benefit will be. And if you end up earning income, the check will actually be reduced prior to full retirement age and then recalculated. So I think the way you navigate this decision, Santiago, is to take your current plan of record. And if you built your pie cake, and you should already have the next 5 years or so funded, which would get you to full retirement age, by the way, assuming you do, and then create a couple what if scenarios. What if we took our Social Securities at age 62? How does that look relative to the plan of record? What if we took our Social Security at full retirement age rather than 62? How does that look compared to our plan of record? I am not opposed, Santiago, to taking Social Security early. I think it's viable. In fact, if you look mathematically based on life expectancy, whether you take it at any age, statistically, it's all supposed to end up in the same place, assuming life expectancy. And you are correct in terms of one of the big benefits of Social Security is that it is inflation adjusted. And so I would look really hard at maybe we adjust to full retirement age rather than 62. I think that would be the first place that I would look. But you have to just look at the numbers side by side and make a judgment call. If you plan to work prior to age 62 or even have that on the radar, I would be careful because you'll just have the benefit go away. And yes, it will be recalculated at full retirement age, but that will take over 15 years to break even on that. So I think first look at full retirement age as the option. In terms of inflation, is it going to be here forever or is it transitory? I don't know. The good thing is that Social Security is adjusted, and so that's why it's such a valuable benefit. But I would look at full retirement as the first serious one, especially if you're planning on working. Hopefully that helps, buddy, and I will give Nicole your best regards. Now let's go set a smart sprint.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a little baby step we can take in the next 7 days to not just rock retirement, but rock life. So in the next 7 days, I want you to think about what can you be at your very best in energy, in work, and in love. What is the fully actualized, energetic you? And what would you call that version of you? It doesn't have to be eloquent. It doesn't have to be something that is meaningful for anyone else. In the workbook that we're going to share in Six Shot Saturday, they have a few frameworks to help spur your creativity. Fireball is mine. Here's some other examples I'm looking. Disciplined athlete, world-class mystic ninja, record-breaking rower, enthusiastic athlete. Let's see another one. Samurai warrior. I love that one. Effortful warrior. Let's see another one here. Her. Doesn't matter what it is. You pick your identity for energy, work, and love, and just start playing around with that. Because that is your exemplar you that sets up the game that we're all going to play to live a heroic retirement. Here's that awkward end of the show. No, hey, thanks for hanging out with me today. Next week, we are going to talk about setting targets that we can actually use our agency to execute on that will bring us closer to these exemplar identities that we aspire to be. I'm excited for that. And I'm excited for this week. I hope you are too. Be well. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance reference is historical and does not guarantee future results. All indices are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. Make sure you consult your legal, tax, or financial advisor before making any decisions.